Live. Okay, we're live now. Uh, Madam Secretary, we'll probably start with you. We're spending about 90 minutes each week. That may change with the new aggressive crossover date. We may push this back a little bit, but for this week, we're spending the next hour or so going through some budget proposals, uh, primarily from ACCD. And um, I don't have my agenda right in front of me, but I know we're talking about sustainable jobs, the marketing program, and brownfields today. So if you want to give us an overview or an intro to other folks, that would be a good way to start, I think.
That sounds great. Good morning, everyone. For the
Morning.
record, I'm Lindsay Curley. I'm the Secretary of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. And I want to thank you all for, I have a jacket that color, Senator Ballant.
I needed something very cheery this morning.
Yes, brighten the day, right?
That's right.
Actually, you know, just on a personal note, you don't ever need it to wear anything cheery, Becca Ballant. You
That's right.
are cheery.
Thank you all for taking the time this morning and for dedicating time every week to talk about the many issues moving forward. There's a lot of work to get through, and having this time, dedicated time, is really appreciated. I know that you wanted to talk about, as you mentioned, brownfields, tourism, and marketing, and the jobs campaign this morning. So I can give you a really brief overview, and then we can bring the ACCD team in as the experts. You'll hear from Commissioner Goldstein. She'll say that the brownfields proposal is her favorite proposal that the governor has put together. Have you not heard that? And I have to say, I'm equally as excited about it. So it's a program we don't hear about or talk about often, but the additional 11 million investment for ACCD and 14 million for A&R will have a huge and lasting impact on our community and the properties in them. In terms of tourism, I know this committee has been incredibly supportive of the consumer stimulus program, and we're excited about that too. Heather can review the numbers specifically, but with the $500,000 investment, we're able to inject $475,000 into our local businesses, and individuals spent above and beyond that as well. I will say now more than ever that the tourism fund conversation is imperative, and we need to be able to compete for visitors when things open up again, come summer and fall and through 2022. We're going to need to be positioning ourselves ahead, and this money will be a critical, it will be a game changer in terms of our ability to do that. So with that, I really do want to turn it over. It looks like, is brownfields first on the agenda? So where you'd like to start?
That may be a good place to start. Before you leave, I want to ask a question that I'll ask the other witnesses as well. As you probably know, there is another appropriations bill making its way through the process. We've had the Budget Adjustment Act, and we've had some joint fiscal activity, and now there's a bill coming over from the House. I can't remember the exact name, whether it's COVID-2 or however they're labeling it. It has several names. And we're being asked to weigh in on that, most specifically on the $10 million additional recovery grants that people want to get out the door. When Adam Gresham was in finance, I asked them, is there any reason why any of the 210 million in one-time monies had to wait till July to be spent? Aren't there some monies out there that we can get out the door quicker? And brownfields jumps to mind. What is your feeling or thoughts on, should we, if we like the brownfields idea, is there any reason to wait on all or part of it, or could that get to the governor's desk in March rather than May?
Well, My staff hasn't signaled to me that that's a no. I would say anything we can get moving on sooner rather than later would be great. I do know it takes time to get these projects off the ground. So again, I should really leave it to our director, Christy Farnham, or Commissioner Goldstein to answer that question, because they know better how much work it is to get each project and get that money out the door. But I think if money came to us sooner rather than later, I don't know that we would balk at that.
So the tension is that obviously the Legend wants to do due diligence on these things, and that's normally the budget process. And then you also, when you advance something, you give it priority status compared to everything else that's waiting in the budget. So when we look at things for this earlier bill, we want to look at those kinds of things to say, and they have some specific need to get out earlier, like the construction season. You know, do you need,
Right.
if things are shovel ready and you're going to compete with other things and the money doesn't flow till July, it may have difficulty. So those are the kinds of questions we need to ask over the next few days if we're going to have any input on our appropriations committee has specifically asked us for input by next Tuesday. So
Well, yeah.
unless
Thank
you
you.
have something else to add, we can move on. And if we're doing brownfields, I don't see Joan on the call.
Chris,
Joan's not here yet. Tom Kennedy's here.
Christy's here as well. Christy, I'll just ask you, would you rather go to tourism first, or are you planning to kick off?
I think between Brett and I and Trish Capolino for DEC, we could field those questions.
Oh, good. Okay.
And specific to the idea that the money would be coming sooner rather than later, I think that would be a wonderful problem to have. I think that the scenario.
Sorry, would you just introduce yourself for the record and for the public?
I apologize. It's Christy Farnham. I'm the Director of Business Support with DED, and I also manage our Brownfield program. And the question was whether or not we could spend money sooner rather than later with the proposal that has been advanced. And I think that the answer is yes. So we're not going to have to go look for projects to spend this money on. We have a very strong pipeline always coming in from our partners in DEC and communications with our regional planning commissions and our regional development corporations. And I think that we could find some really great priority projects to infuse this funding to.
So
it might make a little sense just to do some background for the committee. I don't know how much exposure you've had to the Brownfield program and specifically to the team of DEC.
I was just going to say we should start out by assuming that we know very little about brownfields.
And Brett, again, if you'd introduce yourself, that would be great.
Sure. I'm Brett Long. I'm the Deputy Commissioner of the Department of Economic Development.
So who's going to give us the background on brownfields?
Actually, I think I will ask Trish Capolino because she has a much broader experience, a much broader overview than we do in DED, and then I can fill in the DED parts.
Okay, Trish.
Trish, are you on?
She's muted. Yep, there she is.
Hi, I'm Trish Capolino with Department of Environmental Conservation. I'm the Senior Program Manager for the Sites Management section where the Brownfields program resides. To give you a quick overview of the Brownfields program, I think it's always important to let people know what a brownfield is. So when we think about what a brownfield is, so we all have the same image in our head, it's really a property where expansion, redevelopment, or reuse is complicated because there's real or perceived contamination present on the property. So you know it's there or you think it might be there. The Brownfields program in its entirety isn't just the state programs. We partner with EPA, we partner with all our regional planning commissions and the regional development corporations, and we prioritize projects together that we work on with federal funds that come into the state and then any state funds that we might have. The DEC is primarily focused on relief of liability. When someone purchases a property that has contamination on it, there's environmental liability that's attached to it, and so they can enroll and a liability program that DEC manages called Brownfields Reuse Environmental Liability Limitation Act statutory program that allows a developer to come into the program, conduct site work, conduct cleanup towards whatever redevelopment they're going to have, and at the end receive liability protection from the state of Vermont. When they enroll in that program, they are then eligible to receive funds from the Brownfields Revitalization Fund that Agency of Commerce manages. And so through that program, DEC oversees the assessment and cleanup of the project to make sure it meets state standards and that the cleanup eventually is married to the redevelopment of the proposed project. We work directly with the developers and the consultants. And if the regional planning commissions or EPA are funding it, we work directly with them as well. And through this process, we're continually working with Agency of Commerce to try and help with any additional funding or business development resources that the developers may have. That is the broadest overview of the Brownfields program I think I can give you.
Let me ask you a question, if I may. So are these brownfields identified and designated as such? And how many do we have in the state? And are they all over the state? And does a property owner have to come to you to get a designation, if there is such a designation, or do you periodically go out and seek and find these folks, these parcels?
So they are designated, and they're designated because they enroll in our liability program. So any development or developer that wants to enroll in the BRELA program needs to submit an application to the DEC for review and approval. So every project that comes through us that's enrolled in that BRELA program is registered on our database. So you could search for BRELA projects. To date, when I last looked, there were 222 projects that were enrolled in the BRELA program. 92 of them have been completed. But I know that this week I received 4 different applications for Brownfields projects. So they continue to come in. I think our last, the highest amount that we got was 2019, where we got 28 BRELA projects in 1 year, and 2020 was the second highest year. So they're not slowing down. There are plenty of projects out there for developers to purchase and redevelop. To seeking them, when we first started the program in 2004, we were begging people to come into the program, and now it happens on its own. And I think it's in part because we've had such a strong relationship with our regional partners that they can talk to the people in their community. We've done a lot of outreach so that people know about the program. Yes.
Trish, it's Alice in Clarkson High. Can you give us a notion of the dollar value of the cleanup of the remaining projects that you have? That would, I think, be helpful to put this 25 million into perspective.
It ranges based on the complexity and size of the project. We have some cleanups that are $25,000 or $50,000, and I see, Bob Flint is on the phone, and he might have one of the larger dollar amount projects where we've already put some money into cleanup, but there's probably another 5 million or more waiting for that project, Jones and Lamson at Springfield.
Right, but I'm talking about the 100+ projects that still exist. You don't have a dollar value on the total cost of all those cleanups?
Well, normally we need a corrective action plan from a consultant that tells us how they're going to clean the site up and what the development is. And so on some of them, we've gotten that far, and some of them we haven't because the money doesn't exist to assist them to get to that point. So
okay, and I just would love, because I'd love to frame up the finances of this for the committee, because I understand the funding for the brownfield cleanups has steadily gone down. It's not increasing. And these can range, as Trish says, from several thousand, tens of thousands to many millions of dollars. My understanding also, just as we look at this for one-time money and immediate need, is that these are mostly immediate, many of them anyway, are immediately ready to be worked on because they've been in the pipeline for so long. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, and it might make sense for me to describe why this is important from an economic development standpoint. Most of these brownfield sites are associated with, located near downtowns. And what happens is we wind up in situations where somebody who's looking to do a development is confronted with the decision as to whether to do it on contiguous to a downtown on a brownfield site or to do it on a greenfield site. And the unfortunate truth is that in the vast majority of cases, it's cheaper to do it in a to do the development on a greenfield parcel, which is, I don't think, what any of us would like to see. We'd like to practice smart growth principles and, to the extent possible, have the development happen in the downtown. So the situation we wind up with is that we have somebody who's a developer, they're confronted with two parcels. One of them they might be able to get some financing for to help clean up with the brownfield, but they usually still wind up having a gap. And what we see is that these funds can be used as a catalyst to ensure that some gap financing is available so that these downtown sites get redeveloped. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
It does. And we're going to be starting next week on a smart growth bill where this concept or this money might fit in nicely. Does anybody know, does Lindsay or Joan, in terms of the governor's proposal on brownfields, is this just a number in the budget that gets assigned to an existing program, or is there any language associated with this proposal?
Yeah, I believe the language states that this is going into the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund. I'm just trying to think about where is that language.
It doesn't matter where it is. Is it more developed than just putting it into an existing program? And if it's not, I need to understand, despite all those explanations, a better understanding of what that program is. I guess I'm at such a beginning stages, I don't know, does this program pay for all the consultancy, the planning, the redevelopment, the liability protection? What does the private developer bring to the table other than the lot they have that can't be developed presently?
Right. I don't know, Pat, Patricia, if you want to, let's take the committee through it, because it is a lengthy process. And I mean, these particular properties and these particular gap funds are going to be used for things that heretofore we have not been able to use EPA funding for. I'm not going to say all of them are like that, but for the most part, these are big gaps. But Trish, do you want to take Mr. Chair through and the committee through the process?
Yes. So big picture again, the Brownfields program has been receiving funding. And when I say Brownfields program, I'm talking about everyone in the state of Vermont that receives funds from EPA. To date, it's been 24 years that EPA has been putting money into the state of Vermont. And we've received $51 million from EPA over that time frame. And that is spread to all the regional planning commissions, the regional development corporations that receive cleanup grants, and to the Agency of Commerce, and then directly to DEC. For DEC, we use the funds to pay staff costs, and then whatever is left over we use towards assessment and cleanup. So the funds that we receive go towards helping do a phase one, which is a broad understanding of what the potential issues are at the site, so that when the developer buys the property, they have a very good understanding of what their legal and financial liabilities might be on this property. And to back it up even further, in Vermont and with EPA, liability is joint and several. So once you buy a contaminated property, even if you didn't cause a contamination, you are responsible for what's on that property. That's the biggest thing that comes out of brownfields, is at the end of that process, the developer doesn't have liability anymore for what was on the property that we didn't find, and they can transfer that liability to future property owners. So that's a huge thing for developers, to get that liability protection. The end of the process, which is the certificate of completion, is what severs that liability protection. So we start with the phase one. and move through the process of identifying all of the potential issues that may exist on the property from past use. And that's called the phase 2. It's a site assessment where we take soil samples, groundwater samples, indoor air samples, and we have a really good picture of what the contaminant issues are on the property, so that when we're ready to move to corrective action and finally redevelopment, that redevelopment can happen without having impacts from the contamination that exists.
What does the, just to jump ahead, so there's no liability for the person who buys the property and has it remediated. If there's an injury that occurs later on, who's responsible for that?
So if you're talking about like an off-site third-party impact, that's not covered under the statute. It's the statute covers the person who gets a certificate of completion for changes in standards. So if we change a standard, they don't have to comply with the new standard. It covers them for any new contaminants we start regulating, think PFAS. So everyone who got a certificate of completion before we started regulating PFAS, they are not responsible for that. It covers them for any new findings that were not identified during the phase 2 or the cleanup. So if they do an expansion and they find something that we didn't know about, they're not responsible for that. And it gives them
who is responsible?
Here's the next one. It gives them contribution protection from past owners. So I started with joint and several liability. So if the past owner is still around, we can ask the past owner, DEC, to conduct work and take care of that contamination, and they can't ask the person who has a certificate of completion for any contribution towards those costs.
Does the person who comes to you either with the brownfield application or who is the primary beneficiary of all this work and money to clean up their site, do they have any obligation to develop the site at that point?
So this is a brownfields program. The end goal is to get a redevelopment out of the process. So their application has to show us what their redevelopment is. Sometimes it's a greenfield, sometimes it's access to a river, sometimes it's a completely new commercial redevelopment, industrial redevelopment, or housing project. So the redevelopments range in scope and type of development. They don't get liability protection until they get their certificate of completion. So if they stop in the middle of the process and stop doing work, then they're under the same obligations as any responsible party within our program to have to complete to do the work, because they own the property now. So it's in their best interest to get to the finish line and get that certificate of completion.
Okay.
You have asked about money. There isn't a lot of money in Vermont. And so what we've done has been to partially fund projects, because we can't fund all the projects. Our money goes throughout the entire state, and there isn't that much money to share on all these projects. So we will work with a developer, we'll work with a regional planning commission to try and share funds, but we've never, ever completed a project fully because that money doesn't exist. But I do want to point out that we did look, and in Vermont, for every $100,000 that we've spent on a brownfields project, and I just looked at Commerce and DEC, we've leveraged $290,000 in other funds. So we are leveraging a lot of money on these projects because they're big, they're complex, and they need assistance. And we've put in as much assistance as we can, but we expect that there's going to be a contribution from the developer to finish the project.
Can you give us some perspective as to what this $25 million would mean compared to the money that's been around for brownfields to date?
I can. This is just one thing that we've been tossing around with Commerce is the Shumlin administration created this BEAR program, which is the Brownfields Economic Revitalization Alliance, which allowed property owners to come in and this is apply for our assistance, and that's state's assistance, where we would prioritize projects and we would put all of our resources into these projects, and not just financial resources, but staff time and assistance. And so we were able to select several projects. Two of them were completed, Robertson Paper Mill in Bellas Falls and the Richmond Creamery in Richmond have both been completed. There are several that are still remaining, and Jones and Lamson is one of them, which is Bob Flint's project 453 Pine Street in Burlington, Fonda in St. Albans, and the Rail Yard Enterprise Project in Burlington. Those are the 4 remaining BARA sites that are out there. And when I looked at potential cleanup costs for those 4 BARA sites, they ranged up to about $11 million just to get to cleanup. And that doesn't include the cost to construct. So we're looking at the cleanup costs for those projects, and they're in BARA because they are complicated legally, financially, and contaminant wise. So that is the highest priority for us. Those are the biggest and most complex projects for us, but would also make a huge impact on the economy and those specific neighborhoods where these projects exist, to show some work happening and getting to something that's better than I don't know if Bob brought pictures, but some projects are just collapsing on themselves right now. So.
Right. And Trish, all 4 of those projects are pretty much ready to go, right? I mean, those are all been in the pipeline for a long time, and they're all have proximity to downtowns. They're all, they are all high priority projects. They're downtown projects, and they've been long-term projects.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. It's probably also important to mention that, like a real live example. So there's a site in downtown Randolph that's referred to as the Branchwood property. And some of you, if you've been to Randolph, might notice it because it still has a chimney there. The rest of the old mill property has been demolished. But we've had 2 different economic development relocation prospects look at the property, but they weren't able to get comfortable with the brownfield risk and brownfield costs associated with moving it or fixing it. And so one of those companies was a Randolph located company, LED Dynamics, that decided to do exactly what I mentioned before. They decided to pass on the Branchwood property and to do a greenfield development because it was cheaper and easier and faster. So the idea is that we have some money to be able to do things like potentially do an assessment of the Branchfield site so that we could have a better idea of what remains there, or help somebody who's interested in doing a redevelopment to help cover those costs and actually get it redeveloped.
I will share that one developer that I was talking to, he coined this, and I've used it a lot, where he basically said the assessment and cleanup money is what he calls the risky money. It's the money that you don't always get back when you invest in a project, but it's the money that's needed to make anyone feel comfortable with acquiring a property. They need to know it's there, but it's not something that when they redevelop the project, they're going to get that money back in the end. And so it is that bridge, that gap funding to try and get someone more comfortable and more knowledgeable about what they're acquiring.
And it's also important to point out that the reason for the joint work between DED and DEC is we're there to try to help ensure that the properties that are receiving money are good redevelopment candidates. We typically only focus on properties where there's some redevelopment plan in place or some potential tenant in place to affect the redevelopment and to ensure that it's going to be a productive property at the end of the process.
So I guess, Patricia, you were breaking up a little bit, so I couldn't quite follow what you were saying. I guess I was looking for, and maybe there's not a simplistic answer, but if we're increasing development by on an annual basis on properties by $10 million a year, I have no idea if that's a good number. What would this $25 million do in terms of fast forwarding or multiplying the size of our brownfield program this year?
I think the best answer I can give you is for all of the projects that we've worked on, it's kind of a wait and see process. We look for money that exists within Vermont, and we put as much as we can to help support a project. And I'll use Bob Flint as an example. I've been working on Jones and Lamson for 16 years now. That's the entire time that I've worked for the state of Vermont. It was the first project that I received when I started working in the Brownfields program. And every year we look for funding that can be used to help clean up that project. And we've pretty much fully assessed it now. There's a couple things left to do, but we can't do it until the building comes down. But we've found drips and drabs of money to keep this project moving to get to the end. Some projects can come in and come out. There's 6-month projects, but some of them are a lot longer because there is need for financial assistance. We work with a lot of municipalities. We work with a lot of nonprofits where funding isn't abundant. You can't go to a bank and ask them for a loan to go in and assess a contaminated property. That money doesn't exist except for what's in the Brownfields Revitalization Fund the Agency of Commerce has, or the other revolving loan funds that the RPCs have. So this is money to help further projects. So some of these won't have to wait 3 years to get to an assessment or a cleanup plan that they can then go and implement. We can actually move them forward a lot faster and look for the redevelopments that Brett's talking about a lot sooner.
So maybe, Mr. Chair, it would be good to hear from one of our poster children for this, which is from Tom Kennedy and Bob Flint about the Jones and Lamson property in Springfield. I mean, it's a classic example of why we need this money and why it's so important for economic development in our downtowns, and why it's nowhere else. It's not like you can find it elsewhere, and yet it leverages, once it greenlights the cleanup of a property, it leverages a ton of additional money in getting that development to happen. So maybe it would be helpful to hear a really stark illustration of it.
Thank you, Senator Clarkson. We will do that. Just before we leave our existing witnesses, you heard about the possibility, and I don't know how remote it is, of maybe advancing the money for 3 months or some of the $25 million to get that out the door sooner. Can you give us any idea what the practical benefit of that is, or it's really not going to make much of a difference whether the money gets released on July 1st or it gets released on April 15th?
I think you answered the question yourself with trying to get in front of the construction season. We certainly have several corrective action plans that are approved and ready to go. And if there's funding now to help move them forward sooner rather than later, then we're all for it. We have contracts in place already at DEC, so we can put money towards contracts to start doing some of the work that's needed. So I think it would be great.
I guess what I would need to hear is that 2 to 3 months advance. Yes, it gives you a head start on the construction season, but is the end product, is the end product done before winter in that event? Whereas if we waited till July, it might have to slip over until the following spring.
I think it depends on the project that we end up funding. Some of them may be done by that time frame because a cleanup may not take that long, but it's just waiting for that process to happen or funding to be available. Some of them are still going to be a long-term cleanup.
Okay,
So-
well, maybe if you could go through your list and get back to us by Monday with some projects that could really benefit from the early money, that would make sense. I mean, the default position, quite honestly, is just to wait till July. But if you can make a case that, you know, here are a couple of projects, if you gave us the money 3 months earlier, we could get it done this fall.
And Senator, I would add that this partnership with DEC is critical. It's a staging, so we rely upon their technical assistance to evaluate and characterize these sites so that they're prepared for redevelopment. I liken it to a baton passing, where that preliminary work needs to be done before we're ready to come in with the cleanup efforts and the redevelopment efforts. And so I think front loading is a great opportunity for, you know, more of those projects to be passed off in this partnership.
Thank you. Okay, Tom. Welcome.
Yes, good morning.
Tom and I go back a long way.
And I've been, so for the record, I'm Tom Kennedy. I'm the Executive Director of the Mount Scottney Regional Commission, formerly the Southern Windsor County Regional Planning Commission. Our organization started working on JNL1 in 1998. Through the Regional Planning Commission's efforts and EPA, we already have about $2 million invested into that property. One of the biggest hurdles we have right now is that EPA has expanded the eligibility of people who can access EPA funding. So we're getting less and less of it at a time. So in the past, we used to get $400,000, $500,000. Now we get $200,000 to $300,000. The cleanup cost for JNL1 is going to be between $4 and $7 million. We will never clean that project up without these funds. I mean, I cannot put a finer point on that. These monies are absolutely imperative for us to clean up this site. And what's going to happen in the end is these sites are going to become the property of the state of Vermont, because there's no way the town of Springfield is ever going to be able to afford to clean up that site. One of the things that happens, and Trish talked about it, is that the buildings start to decline. We have holes in the roof. So in the past, we had a separation. The asbestos was in one location, PCBs, all these different contaminants were sort of separated from each other. Now we have this toxic stew, and it makes the cleanup even more and more important. JNL1, we are doing an RFP right now for demolition to see what the cost is. We were updating the costs on that, so we can get that out. We're actually, I think it's going out, Bob can clarify this, I think it's going out next month, and we could be ready to go this summer in the cleanup. It would probably take us 1.5 years or 2 years to complete the cleanup or so, but we would be ready to go on that. The other thing I also want to mention, and we keep hearing about just the 2 state agencies, which we have a great partnership with, but also the regional planning commissions have been vital in the brownfield effort. We have accessed over $14 million in EPA funds for testing, and we have provided over $8 million in loans for projects as well. So, and then my final point in this is, it's critical for the legislature to focus on the large projects. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on the legislature to try to spread the money out, but we really, as Trish talked about, there are four projects out there that could cost upwards of $11 million. We really need to, if they're ready to go, to make the investment in these projects, and it's going to be very expensive. No doubt about it. But if we really want to try to help the Springfields, Rutlands, St. Albans of the world, Bellows Falls, we really need to make the investment.
Is there any, this is a question for everybody, as we focus on this, and let's assume the legislature is favorably inclined to honor the governor's request for $25 million. Is there any substantive policy changes in the program that you can see the legislature helping out with, or that we should consider that the program needs some tweaking in any way, money aside, process-wise, priorities, anything you can think of that would make it a stronger, more effective program? Because it's a good time to do that, I would think, with the money hanging out there.
That might not be able to be accomplished for the short term if we decide to move some of this money quickly next week. But I mean, that would be part of the long-term, full session process.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
So
we have
if I may, let's not treat these funds like they're funds that we get from EPA. So there's a lot of limitations on these funds from EPA, such as if you wanted to, if you are a private entity and you wanted to clean up a site, we cannot cannot grant funding to a private entity. We can only grant funding to a municipality or a nonprofit. So my view on this is, there's lots of money out there for the revolving loan fund part of this. It would be very, very helpful that there be no restrictions on the type of entity that could potentially get a grant, for instance, for these funds. Because
That's a great
my thought-
recommendation, Tom. And I would say on top of that, another limitation that EPA puts on the federal funding is a cap on how much money can
Yeah.
go to a site. Grant money
I
can
was
go
going to
a
get to
site.
that. That's right. Yes.
Apologies. Go ahead.
So, yeah. So since these are non-federal funds, I think that we can be creative as far as what the uses are. Because we really want to do is, if we have a developer in the wings, we want them to use their capital to build the building, to develop the site. And if as much financial burden that we can take them off as far as cleaning up the site, more the better. And it's more attractive.
Right. So what is in the budget year to year, other than this one-time shot in the arm, what is usually in the budget for brownfield, gap funding, flexible funding, like you're talking about? Has there been a base funding each year for this program?
There's
No.
never been any state money put into this program from the legislature.
Really?
We've taken money out of the Environmental Contingency Fund that we use to support our responses to emergency response to fund brownfields. And we've taken money out of the Solid Waste Management Assistance Fund to seed the Brownfields Revitalization Fund. That was in 2005 or 6.
Okay, great. On the Jones and Lamson building is, you said before prior that in order to get this assistance, there has to be an end plan of what's going to be on the site after it's all cleaned up. Is there a commitment or is there a plan? I mean, I'm still struggling with the idea, okay, we clean up these sites, and what happens if the developer or the municipality or the nonprofit just doesn't want to go forward and do anything
Well,
with it?
Mr. Chair, that's a great segue into Bob Flint.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Bob, you can answer that question.
Thank you, Senator. So I'm Bob Flint from Springfield Regional Development Corporation. I've been called a lot of things, but I'm not sure I've been called a poster child before. But to orient folks a little bit about my little fixer-upper here we've been talking about. I know most of you have been to Springfield before, but I presume you can see that.
Yep.
So this is what we call Clinton Street, or Route 11 coming into Springfield, 4-lane highway. And this is where 2 of the 3 big machine tool plants that employed thousands of people when I was younger sit. So the one with the circle around it here, where I'm pointing with my cursor, is the former Bryant Grinder property. That's 160,000 square feet, 9 acres. And this is the infamous Jones and Lamson Plant 1, which is 270,000 square feet on 12 acres. Just above that is what's now the Edgar May Health and Recreation Center. On that property is the former Foundry, which is another brownfield property that has cleanup needs. So SRDC, my organization, owns both of these. And Tom had some comments earlier about how long he's been working on it. SRDC started working on it when Al Moulton was the director. We took title to this in 2003 when Pat Moulton was the director, and I've been at it since 2005. So a little bit about, okay, what makes that such a bad site. This is just a picture of what it looked like historically. So this was the early 70s, sawtooth roof, et cetera, et cetera. This is what it looked like yesterday when I went in to take a couple of pictures. And this is, I sort of ironically have the Be Safe Today sign in the background, but you can see the roof is falling in on itself. And this is maybe about a third of the way in. It would not have been safe it was not safe for me to do this, but wouldn't have been safe for me to go further back into the building. The building is collapsing on itself. in terms of why this is such a complex site, and I think Tom used the word stew earlier. Where is my
Toxic stew.
exactly that too? Let's see if I can. Sorry about this. Hang on a second. Where is it here? There we go. So all the pretty colors on the property are the different contaminants. So this to orient you, this is the Clinton Street. We're going into Springfield. And this, by the way, is about a half mile from the town's designated downtown. So our organization has been involved with brownfields forever, including the 100 River Street site, which many of you have been to. That's an example of a cleanup project that succeeded in a commercial development. I'll get around to your question, Senator Sirotkin, about developers here in a second. This, by far, in terms of magnitude and the complexity of contaminants, is by far the most complex site I've had any experience with. And oh, by the way, it abuts the Black River. So there's a health issue here that's going on with this property, irrespective of development needs. So just the magnitude is staggering. As Tom said earlier, we've spent collectively have spent over $2 million in assessment and limited cleanup work on the property. And I can't say enough how appreciative we are of the partnership we have with Tom's organization. We work hand in glove, sit on each other's boards. I sit on his Brownfields committee, and then we've worked very cooperatively with both DEC and the Department of Economic Development. I am coming around to your question. So somebody referenced conventional development a moment ago. So even conventional development on a clean piece of property in Springfield, Vermont is challenging because there is no return on investment, or the return on investment is tough. Our industrial square foot rates are $350 a square foot triple net, right? Office square feet is like 10 to 12 bucks a square foot. Hard to justify construction, even in perfect properties, not to mention the millions of dollars involved in cleaning the site up so it's even available to be used for property. However, on the other hand, that map I showed you earlier, flat pieces of property on a 4-lane highway, a couple of miles from the interstate, full municipal infrastructure, fiber. If we can't develop this and work with somebody once it's cleaned up, we shouldn't be in business doing our jobs. SRDC has been in this, has been paying the taxes, has been absorbing other costs for, my goodness, 18 years. We're not going to give up now. And as Tom said earlier, this is kind of a once in a lifetime shot, to take care of some of these properties, to not only help deal with, again, significant health hazards, but to transform the economy of a community like Springfield. Imagine 21 acres, 21 acres between J&L and Bryant's, cleaned up, put back into use, what that does for the tax rolls, what that does for employment opportunities, and how it impacts the region economically as well as the state.
So the answer, not that it's right or wrong or good or bad, but the answer is there's no definitive plan at this point as to what the use would be. There's no housing or tenants or anything lined up in exchange for all the money that's being put in to the cleanup at this point. That's yet to be determined.
Just two comments, please, Senator. So our tentative plans are to build 2 new buildings on the property, and we have conceptual plans for that. That would total about 140,000 square feet from the 270 that's there now. Secondly, in 2008, when Betsy Bishop was the Commissioner of Economic Development, she worked with the legislature who designated that site as an opportunity zone, which is the only one in the state, I believe, separate from the whole federal opportunity zone discussion. And by the way, the whole community of Springfield is a federal opportunity zone. So there are advantages to developers or businesses that locate on that property that are new to Vermont that are unique to that property. So again, that doesn't precisely answer your question. To be honest, it's folly to think that there would be a developer who's ready to do this project. It's incredibly premature. In fact, the state designated opportunity zone, the town of Springfield is yet to trigger that because there is an 8-year clock. If we triggered it in 2008 when it was passed, it would have already expired, and here we are.
Could I just for a minute, Bob? So when we received the application for Jones and Lamson, the intent was to actually reuse the building as it was. And that was back in 2004 or 5 when the Umbrella application came in and the building wasn't completely caving in on itself. And we actually didn't identify that the inside of the building was coated in PCB oil. So there was a plan to reuse and rehab that building for occupational use. That plan has changed, and now we're still in the process of trying to work through what to do with the slab of the building, which informs what the redevelopment is. So under most circumstances, the redevelopment that comes in with the project is the one that we can and ultimately end up implementing. But in this case, we've had to rework what we're doing out there a lot because of what we're finding through the assessment process and the cost for the cleanup.
I'm just, before we move off this topic, I mean, the reason I asked that question is that I'm new to this and I'm thinking like with TIFs, we give money and help and we know what the end product is likely to be. And in exchange for the help and assistance that the state is giving to a private developer or to a town, they're agreeing to develop the property in a certain way. It sounds, at least in this particular instance, there's a lot of money put in and an incredible amount of effort put in, and it doesn't sound like there's as clear a guarantee that someone's going to take the benefits of all of that. Let's say, well, I mean, in this case, it's not a private developer, but if it were a private developer, they get a lot of help to increase the value of their property and with no clear plan as to what they're going to do with it at the end. But I'm still learning and I'll get those questions answered at one point or another. We need to move on. I really thank everybody for being here. That was a great Brownfields 101. And if you want to follow up with us by Monday, you know, there might be some chance of trying to talk about getting some of the money early on for shovel-ready projects. Okay, let's move on to, I'm going to move on to Sarah and to Ellen Kaler. I think, is it $500,000?
Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Because we haven't heard from you yet on this governor's initiative on, I'm drawing a blank on the name. It's something like sustainable jobs, but.
Vermont, it's called the Vermont Jobs Campaign for $500,000.
Okay. Which one of you would be better to get us started on that?
Definitely Sarah, because it has nothing to do with our organization.
Okay, well, if you want to depart, Ellen, you can. I thought for some reason you would be a good witness on this because I saw jobs. So
absolutely, but this is DOL's project, so I yield to Sarah, the leader of this.
Okay, let's try and make this fairly brief, Sarah, because I
Good morning.
Heather too.
And with your permission, the commissioner is on, and I would like to defer to him. He'd like to kick it off and explain the ask.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Good morning,
Sure.
Commissioner.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. I will let Sarah cover, any direct questions you have about workforce development. Obviously, this is her area of expertise. I think the question is really around what we're calling the jobs campaign or part of the governor's COVID recovery plan. Looking holistically, the department did advocate at the planning stage for funding to help kickstart a Vermont jobs campaign of some kind. I'm sure we've all been in other states or have seen online where other states have a very direct job rehire or employment campaign. I can rattle off some. Massachusetts comes to mind. They just redid their hire campaign, so it's called Mass Hire. But there's a prominent one in Arizona, in Ohio, North Dakota, and some other places. We've talked a lot about workforce expansion, but I think when we look at it through the lens of COVID recovery, we wanted to make sure there was funding set aside, devoted towards the reemployment of Vermonters who have been dislocated due to the pandemic. But I think the underlying issue, although it may have been temporarily set aside, is that I think the underlying issue is we're still going to have a workforce shortage issue. Again, less immediate, given the fact that there are probably more people unemployed right now than there are available jobs. But I think as we look towards a recovery plan, it's still, all indications show that there will still continue to be workforce shortages, and because you're not always guaranteed that the person unemployed has the right skills or lives in the right location to meet the actual employer need at that given moment. So we did secure an initial amount of $500,000 in the recommendation. This is under section B 1100A4 of the budget proposal. It's a one-time request. And when we talked about what a plan would look like for employment and reemployment efforts, we looked at things like conducting an employer needs assessment and even an available job market analysis. So there was some work that was actually done before COVID-19. You may have remembered that the RDCs were very instrumental in going around and holding essentially listening tours and gathering information from employers about what their needs were in various communities. Unfortunately, that was before COVID, and my guess is that the needs and the struggles have changed dramatically just in the past 12 months. So I do think there's a need to have some additional effort around touching base with employers, whether that's through a contractor, whether it's through working with the RDCs and the Agency of Commerce. Again, I think that remains to be seen, but needing to work with employers to identify exactly what their needs are. The job market analysis is really looking at what is out there for available jobs versus the number of people who are unemployed and what types of jobs are available. We have various mechanisms that capture available jobs, whether it's Vermont Job Link or whether it's the system that the Agency of Commerce has, which scrapes job openings from various sites, but really needing to have a concerted effort, because I think those only capture a portion of what's out there. Expanding virtual services within our various regions. Again, so being able to meet the continuing pressure of COVID and the need to provide virtual services. We had talked in this committee and others about linkages, more formal linkages with other agencies like the Agency of Commerce by utilizing a collaborative customer relationship management tool. So right now, the Department of Labor, the Agency of Commerce, and other divisions of Voc Rehab, we all carry our own portfolio of clients and employers we work with, and really, we want to get rid of that and have a centralized database where we are working collaboratively. And that's been a long time goal, but I think now is the time. Looking at job promotion, we're partnering with employers to help promote available jobs and expanding that. Link with UI claimants on available jobs and help get them linked up with employers. Maybe even branding, think Vermont Jobs. So we have talked about adding a jobs component to the Think Vermont campaign. So there's options there. Facilitated job connections. I think there's an expanded need for making sure we're connecting with underserved or underrepresented populations, but also expanding maybe what we would call the diverse worker recruitment. So the ability to work with these individual populations, but also working with employers so that there's a direct connection with these individuals. And I should say in that I include the various other components like language options and other options for connecting with various populations. And then I think there's certainly a need at this point for employer technical assistance. And again, you may look at this list and say it's a pretty lofty list to do with 500,000 and in a calendar year or in a fiscal year. I think we would say that these are the ideas that various groups and individuals have put forth. But I think we would fully expect that this might be a multi-year recovery plan in the end. And so again, I say that in that the 500,000 may be a kickstart to a recovery campaign or a jobs campaign, and that there may be future years where we would come back to this committee and other committees seeking additional funds to either launch a new effort or continue a successful effort that's already underway. So I'll leave it at that, and we can jump into questions.
Yeah. I'm not sure you left much for Sarah to talk about.
Yeah, isn't Sarah going to do something next?
Sarah can talk about how it works on the other end.
So let me you cited the budget language of where the 500,000 is. Is there a lot of detail in the budget language, or is it just 500,000 one time for a jobs campaign? How does it read?
Yeah, let me pull it up here, but I believe it is very basic. It does say 500,000 to Vermont Department of Labor for employment and reemployment support services.
Okay.
So pretty vague.
So can you get us like a 1 or 2 page white paper on what you intend in writing, what you intend to use this money for and why it's appropriate? I mean, I think you've already opened the door that saying it may be appropriate for one time, but it also has the advantage of being sort of a pilot where you might want to continue it into base funding. So, I mean, I'd like to see, we're going to have to deal with this later on, but I'd like to have in our file a further description of this program. And also a little bit, one of the things I'm finding consistent in a lot of these requests is there's very little in the like a budget presentation of how you got to $500,000. You know, that could have been 1.5 and we would just say, okay, 1.5, 500. We just don't know how you came. That's the number. And if it's just, that's all we can afford, and that's the most we can get from the governor, I understand that, but is there any rationale behind the specific number? So,
sure.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to really have to move us along, Sarah. I think we get the idea here.
You get the idea, yeah. If you have specific questions, I'm happy to answer, but I do know you've got a pretty long list of folks here.
Okay,
well,
you're around quite a bit. Ellen, I invited you, maybe not correctly, but you're here, so I know you always have something to say. So if you want to talk to us for a minute or two on this, go ahead.
Sure. I'm very excited. This, for the record, Ellen Kaler, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. I'm very excited about what Commissioner Harrington is talking about in terms of this jobs campaign in the economic sectors that we work in ag and food systems, and renewable energy, in forest products. This is definitely continues to be a big issue of not having enough supply of workers, but also employers who have job openings not really knowing how to find workers. And the JobsLink portal has never been fully utilized in the sectors that we work in and with the employers that we work with, that oftentimes don't even know that it exists. And I would also say that a lot of folks looking for work, unless they're going through the existing system, may not also know that they can be looking on this site So having a marketing campaign and support system, as well as a new platform to really help employers and employees stop missing each other and actually find each other, will be a huge, huge benefit to the state and to the employers. Just as an aside, we're currently working with, I personally have spent a lot of time since April working with President Moulton in terms of reimagining the Vermont Tech's Ag and Food System program, along with about 42 other volunteers that we've recruited to help in this process. And if you haven't spoken to her recently about the transformation process at her college, I would encourage you to do so. But the point is that we've been having a lot of focus group sessions with employers, and they are really needing workers. They have many openings, and they just cannot find people. So we know that there's, because of the unemployment rates and what has happened with COVID, that there are people out there looking for employment, and many of them would actually be well qualified to work in some of our food manufacturing facilities where they have openings, in some cases like 10, 15 openings at a time in some of the larger facilities. But again, they're not finding each other in the marketplace of jobs. And so I can't speak highly enough about the opportunity to use some of these one-time funds to get this project done. It's something that the State Workforce Development Board has talked about for many years. We just haven't had the funding available to do the work. And so very excited to see that this is something that might move forward.
Is this building on the VDOL one-stop portal of the offices where people were, you've created this one-stop already. You created a model for people going and having one place for all this information and connecting all the silos. Is this building on that?
Sarah, if you'd like to go ahead, feel free.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. This is building on not only program integration, but I think just expanding, taking what Ellen just noted, where employers need to be able to have a forum to promote their jobs. We want to work as the connectors for the job seekers to the employment opportunities. And there's work that needs to be done from both sides in order for those connections to be made successfully. And that includes, the customer focused, integrated, coordinated system. And I would just want to point out that when Mike does support or does put forth the white paper, we'll also include some emerging ideas we have about expanding recruitment efforts and making these toolkits on diversification of the workforce available to employers. That's been a really important conversation. And it actually did start pre-pandemic. There's some leaders, including Seventh Generation, who've employed some really promising practices in terms of how to support recruitment efforts that do begin to bring a more diversified workforce in a variety of ways, diversifying everything in terms of, age, race, gender, background, educational opportunity. And so this work does help to sort of pull those pieces together for employers, and also touches the job seekers in the same way.
So, okay, we're going to move on. I'll just make one observation so people know where I sit on this one, especially for the commissioner who's new, is that it really strikes me like I've been hearing this for the entire time I've been on economic development for 7 years, the inability to link up jobs with employers. And it's frustrating. And it doesn't sound like, to me, like throwing one-time money of a small amount of $500,000 is going to do any better than all the other ideas we've heard over the last 7 years. It's frustrating. Anyhow, let's move on.
Mr. Chair, that's why I asked about the one-stop portal that Sarah has brought to us 2 or 3 years ago when they were developing it. I mean, if this builds on something that we have understood and supported in the past, I think I feel differently about it if it's that.
Okay. Not trying to do anything other than be transparent on that.
No, I appreciate that.
let's move on to,
Are-
somebody
are we
said,
gonna Are we going to take a break at all or not?
I think we're gonna I think we'll take a break after this segment, like at about 10:25, I mean, 10:05. Yeah, we'll do 20 minutes here. We'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll go into UI, hopefully. Is that okay? If people want to take a break right now, we can.
I'm gonna take a break. I just need
All right, let's take a 5-minute break right now. And we'll go to Heather and the marketing piece. We're not going to do consumer stimulus. I think someone said that today, but we're going to focus on marketing. We've already talked about